Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Bully Whispers, and we are here today to evaluate Law 17 of Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, keep others suspended in terror, cultivate an air of unpredictability in the TV show The Sopranos. Now it's important to note here that while I normally evaluate each law in and of itself, with minimal references to other laws, and even then only when necessary, this one will be a bit different. This law, as well as the last one we covered, use absence to increase respect and honor, and the next one, Law 18, do not build fortresses to protect yourself, isolation is dangerous, are so close in succession and can apparently contradict each other if not looked at closely, that references will be made to the last episode in this one, and references to these episodes may be made in the next. Quick side note, this dynamic got me thinking about ending this series after all 48 laws have been done, with episodes focusing on an individual. For example, the 48 Laws and Tony Soprano, or the 48 Laws and Carmine Sr., etc. So let me know down in the comments if that's something you think you'd be interested in. Anyways, in this episode we will evaluate Law 17 in The Sopranos by first looking at how one of its base premises arguably provides the basis for the entire show, and how the FBI relies on most people's reaction to that premise, before moving on to whether or not Tony was unpredictable by Law 17 standards, which is where we run into Detective Makazian, Ralph Cifaretto, and Muscles Marinara, as well as the comparison with Law 16, and ending with the circumstance in which it can be good to be predictable, as shown through Patsy Parisi. According to Greene, there is nothing more terrifying than the sudden and unpredictable, and while the examples given in the book are tornadoes and earthquakes, for Tony Soprano it's panic attacks. His fear of the sudden and unpredictable panic attacks is what brings him to Dr. Melfi to kick off the series, and what allows the series to be much deeper than the largely superficial rob 'em, shoot 'em, get arrested style gangster shows that preceded it. Greene also notes that animals act in very predictable ways, which is why we are able to so easily hunt them. Unlike animals, people have the ability to consciously change their behavior. However, being scared of unpredictability, very few ever do. People tend to behave in patterns, and the FBI relies on this. Let's take Tony for example. The FBI is so familiar with Tony and everyone in that house's patterns that they know specifically when the best time to go in is. On top of that, Tony is fully aware that he is being watched and attempts to adjust accordingly, but they know about that as well.
Tony avoids talking business in the house if he can, but if he has to, he'll take somebody out by the pool. Except there he fears parabolics. The basement has these noisy AC ducts. He turns on the air, and he feels it's safe.
So when it comes to the FBI, Tony is very predictable even when trying not to be. The same thing can be said when looking at Tony through the eyes of a crooked law enforcement like Detective Makazian.
You said many times that at least with Tony Soprano, you know where you stand.
That is the opposite of keeping people suspended in terror, and something to keep in mind as we get into whether or not Tony was unpredictable by Law 17 standards. In doing so, we will be looking at two examples. First, Tony's treatment of Ralphie, and second, Tony's treatment of Muscles Marinara. With Ralphie, it could be argued that Tony did a good job keeping him suspended, like when Ralphie tried to apologize, as well as being unpredictable, like when he beat him up outside the Bing. However, this is not necessarily the case. First, due to the in-terror part of keeping them suspended in terror, it's easy to view just making people fear for their lives as following the law. However, this just gives people nothing to lose and creates the right environment for a coup because it ignores the first part. Keep them suspended. The historical example given, Filippo Maria, a 15th century Duke of Milan, would constantly be praising someone one day and insulting them the next, promoting them and demoting them, etc., all to keep people on their toes as to where they stood with him. However, with Tony, as previously mentioned, you know exactly where you stand, and this was certainly the case with Ralphie. From the very first time we see them meet on the show, Tony makes it abundantly clear that he doesn't like Ralph, and never lets him feel like he even has a chance to change that. Even when he finally does give Ralphie the promotion and has the opportunity, even if only for the purpose of deception, to let Ralph think he might be able to patch things up, Tony continues to make it abundantly clear that he doesn't like him. With that in mind, many of Tony's supposedly unpredictable actions, such as beating up Ralph outside the Bing, really weren't. While the timing and trigger for the event couldn't have been known until it happened, the act of Tony kicking Ralphie's ass was not only predictable, it was almost inevitable. So in this instance, Tony was just being impulsive, and for those of you who've seen the Power Law 16 episode, this may appear to be the same problem Tony ran into with Muscles Marinara, but it's not. The difference between the two can be found in the wording of the initial quote. be deliberately unpredictable. Whereas with Ralphie, Tony was acting on impulse. With Muscles, he knew exactly what he was going to do and exactly why he was going to do it. He was deliberately unpredictable. So while this fight may have violated Law 16, it falls right in line with Law 17, and in doing so, shows how the same act can be viewed differently through different laws. This is the dynamic I was referring to earlier when asking if there was any interest in episodes that cover all 48 laws but focused on one character, which would enable us to focus on specific personality traits, or instances such as this, through all 48 laws. Anyways, for this particular law, Tony handled Muscles Marinara quite well. Tony treated him well to start with, to put him right at ease, then he was deliberately unpredictable, all of which is guaranteed to keep Muscles on his toes from here on out. That being said, Greene points out that this is a strategy that needs to be used judiciously. If used too often in keeping people in suspense, especially through promotions and demotions like the Duke of Milan, it just makes you look indecisive. And if used too often in terms of violence, it just makes you look crazy. So the right mix is necessary. However, there can be advantages to being viewed as the predictable and therefore terminally subordinate type, and one is that it makes it easier to set up a smokescreen, which we can see through Detective Makazian and Patsy Parisi. When Detective Makazian told Tony that Big Pussy was a snitch, it was discovered that he owed money to Puss, and Tony quickly put two and two together regarding a potentially daring move by Makazian.
Doesn't mean he's a liar. Just means he's got a reason to see Pussy dead. It buys him time.
Yet due to his predictable and submissive reputation, even when they thought he was wrong and it was Jimmy Altieri, Tony still assumed it was an honest mistake.
Makazian's guy got his facts crossed. They both get busted at the same fucking time. Jimmy and Pussy. You understand?
With Patsy Parisi, it's important to keep in mind that as the audience, we see a lot of things that Tony doesn't, like the gun incident. From this incident, there are two directions we can go in evaluating Patsy, with the first taking him at face value, and the second viewing him through the lens of the fan theory that he was involved in Tony's death. At face value, Patsy is a relatively timid gangster compared to most of them, and in that light, his inability to shoot Tony is not only predictable, but also provides a great example of why Greene describes these types of people as terminally subordinate. They are too scared to change up their behavior patterns and face the unpredictable. So while Patsy did make it till the end, his rise was very slow and almost entirely dependent upon people dying until his son hooked up with Meadow. If Patsy did have something to do with killing Tony, then the only reason he was in a position to do so, or even was alive to be in a position to do so, was because of his predictable, subordinate image. Tony had Patsy's twin brother killed, Patsy knew it, and Tony knew that Patsy knew it. If Tony had done the same thing to a character with a more unpredictable nature, like Chris or Richie, he would have at least watched them like a hawk from then on, if not just killed them right away. Well, thanks for watching this episode here on Bully Whispers. As always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score. Oh, and by the way, regarding the thumbnail, I really couldn't think of anyone, so I just decided to do something random. Maybe it'll change up here soon if I think of a better one, but that explains that. Thanks for watching.